And joining us now to talk more about the latest round of peace talks between Israelis and the Palestinians, Matthew Brodsky joins us. He's the Director of Policy for the Jewish Policy Center. Thanks for joining us and welcome back to the show.
Good to be with you again.
Matt, let's start with Israel's announcement to build more settlements. Stephanie mentioned that in her story, along with the recent release of Palestinian prisoners. Does both these moves, in fact, cancel each other out?
It's not really a canceling of each other out. Two separate things here. The part about Palestinian prisoners, Netanyahu agreed to that transfer because he couldn't accede to the other two Palestinian demands, which are preconditions from their side for negotiations. And that is a freeze on settlements, which Israel did agree to in 2010, and there were no negotiations from the Palestinian side then, and to base the discussions of borders along the 1967 boundaries. So on one hand, this was what Netanyahu decided would be the most politically, I guess it's something that he could stomach more than the other 2 points. The settlements is he's not bound by a settlement freeze, and what he's building on is East Jerusalem, which is very much thought to be part of a future Israeli state. Unfortunately, he didn't use the time to specify which borders, what settlements he would like to keep for Israel, which would make the settlement issue a much less of a challenge going forward.
Because for a lot of people in the international community that don't understand the intricity, the ins and outs of all this, it might seem confusing. It might send the message that perhaps neither side is very serious about these latest round of talks.
Well, when it comes to territory, and this would be probably one of the easier issues of the core issues that they need to discuss. You have more than 80% of the Israelis who are living across the 1967 line, or are called settlers, very close to the 1967 borders. Now, they discuss land swaps for ways in which Israel and Palestinians can make up for land. There's a formula that the Washington Institute came out with a few years back where a swap of 4.79% of West Bank land would hold 80% of Israeli settlers, and that would help solve Israel then give back that same percentage of Israeli land. If that were to be done, this is where most of these settlements are for Israel. They're places that are already built up. They're part of Israel as far as they see it. That would really remove the whole issue from the table. So, I mean, and again, it's never been the settlements that's the impediment to peace. It's the refusal of both parties to meet the most minimal expectation of the other side.
If there wasn't this perceived pressure from the international community, especially the U.S., would both these sides be talking right now?
No.
If there were, and secondly to that, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has given sort of a 9-month deadline for something to happen. How realistic is that?
I don't think it's terribly realistic, and I don't think deadlines have been a good thing in the Middle East in the past. The peace process is not driven by American timetables that are just randomly chosen. To get to the actual issues, to solve Jerusalem, to solve the refugee issues, these are things where Palestinians are going to have to accept an Israeli state that is a Jewish state and that is secure. They haven't done that if they're saying that what they want is the return of 5 million refugees to Israel itself, while at the same time having a West Bank for a Palestinian state that is free of all Jews. It doesn't make sense, and it's nothing that Israelis would ever be able to handle. It wouldn't be a two-state solution then. So if the core position on a Palestinian side is that there must be the return of all those refugees, that's something Israel will never accept. Palestinians have their own side where they say Israel must accept that as a minimum. Until those core positions move, or there is some movement in either direction by either side, the point of sitting down and talking, fine, but that's not going to change those core positions.
All right, Matthew Brodsky, we appreciate your time. Thanks again for joining us here on the show.